Hello and welcome to Take Two, the programme that takes a second look at the big issues. I'm Ian Henshall. Today we have a report by Fran from the recent London conference on encryption. With the NSA given a backdoor into your computer by the big US internet corporations, is it possible to keep anyone's privacy any longer? Roy Hunter has been looking into the ongoing 9/11 Truth campaign and its surprising results in Canada. But first, here are some news items. US accused of bullying in trade talks failure. The establishment view of trade deals is that free trade is always a good thing, and if a country has a law, however popular, that restricts business, then the law should be abolished. The magic wand that removes laws that business does not like is an international treaty. And like most government business, treaty talks have to be conducted in secret. That's the official view. But campaigners hope it will prove to be outdated. These days, awareness of the 1% and the corruption of the political system by big money means that the public are less willing to take things on trust. And WikiLeaks has made it possible for secret negotiations to be opened up to public scrutiny. And that's just what has happened. It's looking increasingly likely that the US-led Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP for short, is floundering, as this report from business magazine Forbes shows. Negotiations have missed the deadline set for agreement with no new target date. Cynics are saying it's time to tap a few more phones in the capitals of recalcitrant Asian leaders and blackmail them, or for the Federal Reserve to speed up the presses even more and bribe them. That's just cynics. Some of the US-sponsored clauses are verging on the bizarre, as dissident economist Joseph Stiglitz has pointed out. He says, the TPP proposes to freeze into binding trade agreement many of the worst features of the worst laws in the TPP countries, making needed reforms extremely difficult if not impossible. Among these reforms are the extension of copyright, originally meant to protect authors being pirated, to 70 years after an author or artist dies, a Mickey Mouse law for Mickey Mouse's new owners, decades after Walt Disney passed away, say campaigners. GM controversy flares up again. Recently, the publishing giant Elsevier withdrew a paper on the dangers of GM food, with little explanation for this highly unusual event. Many suspect the true reason was organised pressure from the GM companies, who are so influential in the NATO countries. Things are different in Russia. You know, that horrible country ruled by a nasty dictator who won't even allow gay activists to break into a church and shout obscenities. Well, Russia Today reports that Russian scientists are calling for a 10-year moratorium on GMOs while proper research is conducted. Vice President of Russia's National Association for Genetic Safety, Irina Ermakova, calls for a thorough study of their influence on human health, and claims that one GM technique actually involves the use of tumour-causing soil bacteria. Quotes, consumption and use of GMOs obtained in such a way can lead to tumours, cancers and obesity amongst animals, she said, and added that doctors have seen a surge of diabetes and cancer in regions where residents have consumed larger amounts of GMO-containing food. Poverty in the UK creates public health emergency. US reports show homeless people left to freeze to death, while some communities even ban tent cities, which is the only place that homeless people can sometimes live if they've lost their job. Here in the UK, we like to think that social security protects us from this sort of barbarism, but does it? The Daily Mail reports fears that hunger in Britain is becoming what they describe as a public health emergency, as the number of people turning to food banks to feed families soars, with a sharp rise in hospital admissions due to malnutrition. The number of people using food banks rose from 26,000 in 2008 to an astonishing 347,000 in 2012. The issue has been raised in a letter to the respected British Medical Journal. Other reports have stressed that vast numbers of children now live in poverty, causing potential problems for decades to come, while many people have to choose between heating and food. Our digital activities were monitored before September the 11th, 2001, but 9/11 was the excuse used to expand surveillance, supposedly to protect us from future terrorist attacks. However, as Edward Snowden, NSA whistleblower, says, there's no evidence any terrorist attacks were stopped by information via this eavesdropping that couldn't have been uncovered by other methods. Snowden revealed US National Security Agency NSA and UK's GCHQ worldwide surveillance of emails and telephone calls. Also, other government agencies and companies snoop on your digital communications. There's a growing global backlash. Our correspondent, Fran Anderson, was at the recent London conference on cryptography, or how to keep your affairs private. Hello, Fran.
Hello, Ian. Yes, Ian, with this ever-increasing surveillance of our online activities, everyone becomes a potential suspect. There's a call by campaigners, charities, even technology companies for international legislation to protect our online data from state and corporate snooping, and the United Nations are now investigating the US and the UK intelligence agencies. The Writers Against Mass Surveillance campaign, set up by some of the world's leading authors, have signed a Bill of Rights. The petition is online for anyone to sign up by going to www.change.org. And the Open Rights Group is taking the UK government to the European Court of Human Rights over accusations of unlawful authoritarian surveillance.
Well, I've got to ask this question. Why should we worry about it if we're not doing anything wrong?
Well, Ian, as the Writers Against Mass Surveillance state, a person under surveillance is no longer free, and a society under surveillance is no longer a democracy. What's alarming is that emails and social media providers are legally obliged to hand over your data without warning you at all. And activists, why you should be bothered? Well, there's quite a lot of interesting examples why. Activists, when organising a lawful, peaceful protest, can find that the police have arrived there first. Businesses need to protect commercial interests. As a consumer, do you really want companies creating a profile of you and making you into a saleable commodity? Journalists, their sources, and lawyers and their clients can face monitoring and threats from paramilitaries, security forces, corporations and criminals, so data confidentiality can be a life or death situation.
Yeah, once the data's been collected, you can't control necessarily where it goes to. Compelling reasons. So what can people do about this? You attended this cryptography conference.
Yes, that's right. Well, the Crypto Party is an international network with many campaigns coming together, campaigning about digital rights, and teaches you how to encrypt your computer, your emails, make your emails and your browsing more private. There's a basic level of encryption, or you can be super encrypted. It all depends how you feel about that. It can get quite technical, which is why it's best to Google up search engine, Crypto Party, and find out where's the nearest one. But here's a few tips. Avoid using Yahoo, Google, AOL for your emails. Instead, try to set up a website and have an email associated with that is a bit more secure. There's also a lot of free software you can install, such as Tor, T-O-R, the Onion Router, for anonymous browsing so that the sites you're visiting online are untraceable and untrackable. Tails, the Amnesiac Incognito Live system, is an encrypted operating system, so the whole operating system can be encrypted. PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, or GNU PGP, encrypt your emails so that only those with the password can read them. Yes, so TrueCrypt has got 2 levels of security, so if you have to give one of the passwords away, that doesn't matter because that will be visible, but there's a hidden volume that will stay hidden. And then OTR, off the record, can be used instead of instant messaging. Proprietary software can often contain backdoors, so use open source free software if you can, such as LibreOffice. And Linux operating system is much more stable than Windows. It's open source and it's less vulnerable to viruses than Windows. And there's free antivirus and firewalls such as Spyware Doctor and Zone Alarm and things like that. You can use Ghost to back up your entire hard drive. So if you do find your computer's hit with a virus, for instance, then it can restore it to its factory settings. There's much more you can find online. Journalists in particular need digital security, and a journalist called Lyra McKee from the Birmingham City University says, use an offline notebook, because nobody can hack into that. If any notes are on your computer, use code words or code names to protect your sources. Instruct sources on their digital security, so both you and they are doing the following: setting up email accounts with assumed names for each source and story, and only access these email accounts from a different computer and a different internet connection than your own, and don't use your library card to do so. Discard those email accounts as soon as you are finished with that story, and agree on a code name in case your source needs to contact you again, so that if you get a message from Joe Blogs, you know that it's that particular source, and then you can say, right, we'll meet face to face and we'll start all the security measures again.
But how secure is encryption? I mean, we think we're encrypting stuff. Does it work?
Well, it all depends, because it's only as strong as your weakest link. So if there's any compromise of security somewhere along the line, then no, it's not going to work. So that's why you have to instruct your sources on their own digital security as well as your own. But also, yes, the problem is if, say, you were a journalist coming through customs, and customs were, they were suspicious that you had a story that they want very much to get hold of the source of your story for whatever reason, they might confiscate your laptop and say, right, if you don't give us a password to what's encrypted on here, you're going to go to prison for a very long time. So if that is the case, then use the TrueCrypt software, because that has 2 levels of security. So you can hum and ha and say, oh no, I don't want to give the password to you at all, and then you backtrack and say, okay, here's the password.
Right.
So they decrypt that bit, but what they won't see is the second level,
right,
which is a hidden file that's encrypted.
Yeah.
There's no even, they cannot even see it, it's not visible.
And the reason we're quite happy to give people this information is because these procedures have not been upheld in courts of law. They're against every declaration of human rights. So we have the right to let people know how they can avoid illegal behaviour by states against all human rights principles they claim to believe in. Another question, that always comes up here: doesn't encryption flag you up as somebody they should be taking an interest in? In other words, if you're trying to keep a low profile, isn't it better just to do everything openly?
Well, to a certain extent, but it all depends why you need to hide your files. If you do need to hide them, then obviously, yes, it could flag you up if you're using PGP. But if you're using something like TrueCrypt, because it's got 2 levels of security, one is a visible encrypted file that can fool them, so you can put data in there that makes it look like you didn't want them to have it, like financial records or something, but actual fact there is a hidden partition that isn't visible, that's got another password where you've got your encrypted files. So you can do it that way. Or another way, of course, is to do it on the cloud. Like you encrypt your files and send it to Dropbox or something like that. Or you can put it on a USB stick and encrypt the USB stick, and use innocuous names for your secret files so that they don't sound suspicious at all. It's much easier to hide your data than it is to rely completely on encryption. If you try and hide it and use encryption, probably the 2 together work pretty well.
Right, I got you, yeah. But, and of course, if everybody started using encryption, then everybody would be flagged up and they couldn't look into everybody. And of course, as you said earlier, businesses, I think that's what angered the foreign governments actually, when they heard that America was spying on them, was, I don't think they necessarily cared that much about their own populations. They certainly didn't react very upset when that came out, but when they did get upset was when they heard that politicians and businesses had been spied on, and of course that's what they use it for a lot of the time, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it could definitely damage the business's profits if some rival got wind of what they were doing. And of course, another thing that people can do is don't be tempted to sign in using your Facebook or your Google account. And nowadays, this seems to be more and more of a trend, I've noticed. Like, for instance, if you want to leave a comment on some website like The Guardian, Telegraph or whatever, it says, why don't you log in using your Facebook and Google account? And I'd advise people not to do that, because that's all to do with what's called identity assurance online. And it's a way of them linking up and finding out who you are, what your online presence is. So don't link things up. And the Open Rights Group is trying to campaign against the compulsory usage of identity assurance online. The UK government are secretly putting that in place.
Are they?
Yes, so they're trying to get people to pay their council tax, their rent, their housing benefit accounts and all that online, and to use identity assurance online. So, this is taking people's rights away of choice, because some people don't have a computer anyway, especially older people, perhaps don't even know how to use one. I mean, we should have a choice whether we want to access paying our council tax online or going into the local post office.
Yeah.
So that's something the Open Rights Group are taking up.
Well, there was a time when you at least had somebody you could telephone if you wanted to make trouble, or an office you could go around to, whereas now, if the computer says no, the computer says no increasingly, and that's it. And then even if you do manage to reach somebody on the phone, they'll have zero authority to do anything about it. So there is a sort of quite an ominous agenda, but they might not have it all their own way as people find out about it. Well, thanks very much, and no doubt we'll hear the more cryptography updates as things develop. Thanks very much, Fran. And now we've got an update on the Rethink 9/11 campaign. This was mainly active at the time of the last anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. 9/11 attacks were 12 years ago now, but the wars and the economic disasters which they indirectly led to are still with us now. So many people say that the outstanding questions about 9/11 still should be answered, and possibly terrible things will be discovered, as many people believe who've looked into this issue. So, Roy, what's been happening with Rethink 9/11? Has it had a second lease of life or something?
What the Rethink campaign focused on, and it was September of this year, so it was the whole month of September, which was the 12th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And what it focused on is Building 7, which is the third building that fell that day. Everybody knows about the Twin Towers coming down. They came down 9 or 10 in the morning, and they've been shown again and again and again on worldwide TV, and everybody's familiar with that. But what few people are familiar with is there was another building, Building 7, and it was 2 football fields away from the Twin Towers, and it was all part of the same complex. And this building was 47 stories. It would have been the biggest building in 33 American states. And it came down at 5:20 that same evening. And of course, it was never hit by an aeroplane. And it comes down at free fall speed. You can watch it. It actually reaches free fall during its fall.
Is it agreed by everybody, including the US government, that it came down at free fall speed?
It wasn't for a long time, and NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who did the technical report on the fall of the buildings, they said no, it didn't, and then it was proven by a guy called Chandler, and he did a video analysis of it, and so that's scientific evidence that it came down, not the whole thing, but for I think 2.25 seconds of the 6-second fall, 7-second fall. 2.25 seconds of that, it was actually in free fall speed.
And that's agreed by everyone now.
Well, NIST kept denying it, and we were going evidence, and in the end, NIST had to turn around and say
they have agreed.
They have agreed that for that 2.25 seconds, it did fall at free fall speed.
Which would imply that there was no resistance at all to the collapse.
No, so there could have been no structure underneath it.
And the collapse was symmetrical.
Oh, yes.
So the resistance must have vanished everywhere at the same time.
Absolutely. And we'll show a clip now.
Did you know that a third tower fell on 9/11? At approximately 5:20 p.m. on September 11, 2001, World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed in 6.5 seconds from normal office fires, according to the government's final report.
The building doesn't even touch the other buildings either side of it. You know, it comes down in under 7 seconds into a nice little pile that doesn't really damage any of the buildings.
So anyway, the campaign.
Yeah, what the Rethink campaign was organised by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, who have got a wonderful scientific technical film called Blueprint for Truth. You can find it all across the internet. And there's no conspiracy theories there. They're just looking at the technical side of the fall of those buildings. And the Rethink campaign was set up to actually raise awareness of the fall of Building 7, because everybody knows about the Twin Towers and very few people know about the fall of Building 7. You can see the adverts on the screen. On the backs of buses in New York, in Times Square, there was a huge 53-foot banner saying Rethink 9/11. Or did you know a third building fell on 9/11? Was the tagline. And they had campaigns in 12 cities across the world, in the US, Canada, America and Britain. And the one in Times Square, for instance, was seen by 1 million people a day. The ones in London were seen by 400,000 people a day. And in 1 month they raised $225,000 for this campaign, and it was a great campaign. It raised a lot of awareness. Various polls were done to measure how much awareness it actually did make, but where it really kicked off was in Canada, in Ottawa. It's particularly in the city of Ottawa, excuse me, where there was a big stink about it. Basically, the Transit Corporation, who the owners of the buses that these adverts were on, got a lot of complaints, and so they had to relook at their advertising campaign, and various officials were saying, well, it might be a little bit controversial, but it's within free speech, and other people were saying, no, we've got to amend our advertising policy. So there was a big stink about it in the newspapers, so, you know, which is
just what you want in a way if you're campaigning.
Exactly what we want.
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing is the total silence.
Absolutely.
Which has greeted really the 9/11. I mean, to me, the extraordinary thing about it is, over all the years I've been watching, there's always questions to ask. You know, any event, there is always questions. Maybe, you know, nobody's making any definite accusations of complicity or whatever, but, you know, there could have been incompetence. Something terrible's happened, and nobody wants to ask any questions about it, and that must be suspicious. That every journalist in the world who's worth their salt must have wondered why there's like no questions allowed about 9/11. How did the hijackers get on the planes? Why weren't there any hijack alarms given off? What was the nature of the anti-hijack exercise the Pentagon was running that morning that they won't answer any questions? They tried to hide that. I mean, you'd think that would be pretty relevant, wouldn't you? Yeah. And pretty suspicious that they want to keep it secret after the event. Maybe it just makes them look stupid, but still. So, well, you know, let's hope that you know, these campaigners can force the media to do what they're supposed to do, which is ask questions. Sure.
But what the media campaign did, because it just raised the profile of the campaign in Ottawa so much, that, as I say, the 4 cities across the world. The 12 cities across the world in 4 different countries that it was in, all had various different levels of like, in London it fell flat really, more or less, but in Ottawa it caused such a storm that what the Rethink campaign have done now is they've raised another $70,000, and they're now doing it in the whole month of December as well, just to you know, to play on that that advertising that they've already got. And they also, because the campaign was so successful back in September, they managed to raise $6,000 in 2 days to conduct a poll amongst Canadians. And the poll showed that the question asked was, have you seen the video of the World Trade Center 7's collapse? And 51% of Canadians who see that video, and it's only, I think it's 7 minutes or something like that, 51% of Canadians who see it suspect that it was controlled demolition.
Well, that's what the pundits said at the time, of course. Thanks very much, Roy.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's it for this programme, and we'll be back again in a week. Thanks very much to the People's Voice for screening us, and thank you for watching.